Though you have been warned and given plenty of explanations, reasons to do otherwise, you have persisted. You've persisted to claim a life of joy and justice, to claim a life filled with this joy, to carve out this time, this space for the renewal of your own heart. Despite all the reasons, the resistance fighting for your attention, luring you towards fear, you persist to practice gratitude for this day, for this life that has been given, this chance to begin again. And so let us gather. Let us gather that we might offer one another courage, strength, healing, hope, and this promise to persist in kindness, to persevere in compassion, and to prevail in a life that is for more than ourselves. Come, let us worship together.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Church of Berkeley. My name is Sarah Ward, and I am your worship associate for today's service. This is a welcoming congregation, and we are always working on how to better welcome and care for one another. If this is your first time here, welcome, and we are so glad that you have come. And whoever you are, we welcome you in the fullness of who you are. As we begin, we want to acknowledge that this church occupies land in Chochenyo-speaking Ohlone territory. We commit our congregation to be in right relationship with Indigenous communities, aligning in solidarity, supporting Indigenous projects, and caring properly for the land. Please take a moment now to prepare yourself and your space for our time together. You might get a candle and a way to light it, so you can join in our chalice lighting at home. And now, let us kindle our flames with these words by Gordon McKeeman. Deep calls unto deep. Joy calls unto joy. Light calls unto light. Let the kindling of this flame rekindle in us the inner light of love, of peace, of hope. And as one flame lights another, nor grows the less, we pledge ourselves to be bearers of this light wherever we are. We also pause to remind ourselves of some of the foundations of resilience. We light a candle of courage, a candle of acts of service, a candle of fellowship, and a candle of hope. May we find and cultivate these in ourselves and in one another. As Unitarian Universalists, Advent asks us what we are waiting for and preparing for in our own lives and in the life of our world. In this season of long nights, Advent invites us to explore the themes of hope, peace, joy, and love. On this third Sunday in Advent, we light a candle for joy. What joys are energizing your journey? May the light of this candle help us bring more joy into the world. And now, please join with us in singing our opening song, Morning Has Come. The words will be on your screen. And now please join with me in saying our covenant. Love guides this church. The quest for truth and justice is its common purpose. To give thanks, listen deeply, speak with care, honor our differences, and seek and grant forgiveness. These things we covenant with one another.
right, y'all ready for some story time? Yeah. Today's story is A Fabulous Frog and Toad story by Arnold Lobel. Toad woke up. Drat, he says, this house is a mess. I have so much work to do. Frog looked in through the window. Toad, you're right. It is a mess. Toad pulled the covers back over his head. I will do it tomorrow, says Toad. Today I will take life easy. Frog came into the house. Toad, said Frog, your pants and jacket are lying on the floor. Tomorrow, said Toad from under the covers. Your kitchen sink is filled with dirty dishes. Tomorrow. There's dust on your chairs. Tomorrow. Your windows need scrubbing and your plants need watering. Tomorrow, cried Toad, I will do it all tomorrow. Toad sat on the edge of his bed. Blah, said Toad. I feel down in the dumps. Why? Asked Frog. I'm thinking about tomorrow. I'm thinking about all of the many things I'll have to do. Yes, said Frog. Tomorrow will be a very hard day for you. But Frog, said Toad, if I pick up my pants and my jacket right now, then I will not have to pick them up tomorrow, will I? No, said Frog, you will not have to. Toad picked up his clothes and put them in the closet. Frog, said Toad, if I wash my dishes right now, then I will not have to wash them tomorrow, will I? No, said Frog, you will not have to. Toad washed and dried his dishes and put them away in the cupboard. Frog, said Toad, if I dust my chairs and scrub my windows and water my plants right now, I will not have to do it tomorrow, will I? No, said Frog, you will not have to do any of it tomorrow. So Toad dusted his chairs. He scrubbed the windows. He watered his plants. There, said Toad. Now I feel better. I'm not in the dumps anymore. Well, why? Asked Frog. Because I have done all that work. Now I can save tomorrow for something I really want to do. What's that? Asked Frog. Tomorrow, said Toad, I can just take life easy. And with that, he pulled the covers back over his head and fell back to sleep. The end. Now we make time in our service for our hearts and our spirits, for our cares and our concerns for one another. We lift up and hold the joys, the sorrows, and the challenges we may each be facing. During our time of silence this morning, I invite you to share any joys or sorrows or significant milestones of your own, just anything that is weighing on your heart right now, I invite you to share in the comments section. I invite us to all hold these cares, these challenges, these burdens in the compassionate embrace of this beloved community. Please join with me now in the spirit of prayer. Spirit of life, known by many names, yet no name fully known. We gather together today with hopes and dreams, but also with fears and with wounds. May we be reminded that all things come and they go, that today's joys and today's sorrows will in time give way to those of tomorrow, and that those of us who have strength to share today ought to do so while we can. That those who are in need ought also to allow ourselves to receive, for tomorrow those roles might be reversed. Spirit of life, mother and father and guardian of us all, help us to remember those who are not here with us today, those who need what we have found here, and those who have what we here need. May we always be open to growth and change, to movement, to grace. In the name of all that is holy, in the name of all holy names that have ever been uttered, and those that have not yet even been imagined, let us say, blessed be, and amen. And now let us join in singing our musical version of the Metta, filled with loving kindness.
Our Unitarian Universalist faith draws from many sources, including humanist, Christian, and Jewish teachings, the words of prophetic peoples from many times and places, and wisdom from other traditions. Each Sunday we hear from many of them, but the first source of our liberal faith is our own personal experience of life. This morning, it is my honor to share with you some of my thoughts about our call and responsibility towards joy. Now that we are smack dab in the middle of the holiday season, we are, with or without realizing it, kind of in the habit of taking stock of what we have in our lives, both material and abstract, and relatedly, what we are grateful for. Who are all of the lovely people in our lives who will be the recipients of holiday cards and gifts? What are our material desires? We're assessing these things this time of year. Who are our people? What do we have? And hopefully we are feeling grateful for our things and our people. And I know this is not just me, but anytime I am asked in some sort of seasonally structured fashion to name what I am grateful for, I automatically situate myself within some kind of pyramid type thing in which I recognize that I fall somewhere way towards the top in terms of all the opportunities that have been available to me in my life. And we all fall somewhere towards the top just by virtue of living in an incredibly rich country. It can be easy to forget when we criticize the United States for being dysfunctional in various ways, like white supremacy, or having like crazy income inequality. It can be easy to forget that Americans all across the wealth spectrum are relatively well off if you consider the totality of humanity. And I know this is nothing new and that we are aware of this on some level. I mean, children are taught around the times of holiday in many religious traditions to consider those less fortunate than yourself, to give back, etc., prompting this comparison of fortune. And I'm sure that many of you do this too when you reflect on how fortunate you are, when you take stock of all your privilege, earned, unearned, whatever it may be, that there is this flip side, this dark side, structures that may have been easy for you to rise through, but that hold others back, that your position on this earth is an exception rather than the rule. We are a congregation whose quest for truth and justice is our common purpose. And that is very aspirational and pure and bold. But really critically examining the truth and justice by situating ourselves in time and space, grappling with the stories of our ancestors, asking if our privilege comes at someone else's expense, whether in this country or on the other side of the world, learning of our own complicity in the pain and suffering of others, we know that truth and justice are fraught. And yet, we are also inundated with this messaging that the holiday season is about joy and celebration and pleasure, and it is. And maybe, like me, you put these various threads together and wonder how much you're actually allowed to feel joy during the holidays, or any time really when we feel almost too lucky, like life has been unfair on our behalf. When I get into this thought spiral, what I try to do is take a big mental step back and remember that we are all a part of a much, much larger puzzle. No one asks to be born. No one chooses the circumstances of their birth. As good UUs, we tend to be vigilant about reminding ourselves that we have agency and responsibility in the society in which we live. We try to bring awareness to our privilege, to be self-critical and critical of the structures towards which we contribute and from which we benefit. And that informs much of the programming of this church. But we must not wring our hands under the delusion that we are wholly responsible for the structures we inhabit, or even capable as individuals of grasping the full arc of the human story. I mean, if we really, really step back, there is just so much. I mean, it is just a lot. I've been thinking about this full arc of the human story thing lately as I've been reading *Sapiens* by Yuval Harari. And if you've read it, then yes, I'm really late to the game. But it's about how, our species arose and became super dominant on Earth, migrating out across every continent, organizing into carefully controlled societies, and kind of creating this reality with which we all now contend. That kind of stuff. And just a little anecdote, one of the weirdest bits so far explains what happened when our species first reached Australia, which took a while because, it required figuring out boats or some kind of seafaring technology, which is pretty impressive. But when they got there, let's say 50,000 years ago or so, all of a sudden there's this mass extinction of all of the megafauna that were previously hanging out on Australia. I'm talking giant koalas, marsupial lions, 6-foot-tall kangaroos, all just wiped out, which is really too bad. But part of the point the author makes is that whatever terrible things you think humans are doing currently, our ancestor humans have done the same, if not way worse. So again, we are just the tiniest sliver of this massive tide of humanity. And sure, our actions matter in the immediate sphere of our lives, and the big takeaway here is not that we are absolved of all responsibility to reckon with the ways in which we benefit from the status quo, but we must also accept that the currents that pull us into the future are endlessly complex. No one understands the full picture. That's just how it is. All we can do is inch just a tiny, tiny bit forward every day into this uncertain future of humanity and of the planet. It's terrifying, and it's also deeply freeing. But let's return to the here and now. And look at us. We find ourselves situated on this earth within a super organized metropolis, one that meets all of our basic needs and then some. And although not without its exceptions or structural shortcomings, it has a pretty generous capacity to meet the needs of a lot of people. And that's no small feat. The ceaseless flow of raw materials, fuel, water, electricity, through the passageways of our community recapitulates the flow of biochemicals through our bodies. The same materials and the same grid, if you will, just on a different scale. In both cases, an astounding amount of work is required to get each little piece exactly where it needs to go. And the end result of all of it is this completeness of life. You have a lot of cells, and they're pretty needy. They are constantly overturning their existing parts and requiring fresh air, water, fuel. But as long as they have these things, they'll just take care of the rest, creating their mesmerizingly intricate dance of life. Protons pumping, DNA coiling, proteins folding. I've said it all before. It is a miracle. And when we are well situated with all of our metabolic needs met, we not only get to be alive, but we get some extra stuff thrown in just as a bonus. If we can carve out some space in between the intaking of fuel, the working, the sleeping, then just maybe we might have a little bit of time left over to learn about our place in the world, to explore what it means to be human, and to just be ourselves. And that, I believe, is a cause for joy. And I might add that joy is not reserved for any chosen subset of the human population, rich, educated, privileged in one way or another. In one of the more pernicious aspects of our society, leisure time is not equally distributed. But still, joy and all human feelings, for that matter, are universally accessible, as are a good number of the best things in life. With that said, there is a noteworthy exception. Access to joy is restricted for people with clinical depression. The pathophysiology of depression varies quite a bit depending on the individual, but often what's happening is that certain pathways in the brain are blocked. What that means, if you consider two brain cells close together, they talk to each other by sending a particular molecule, a neurotransmitter, across the space between them. As successive brain cells talk to each other, a pathway is created which tells the body to respond in a particular way. There are over 200 of these neurotransmitter molecules, and just a handful of them, especially norepinephrine, dopamine, and serotonin, are implicated in depression. People with depression have low levels of these neurotransmitters, or something is preventing them from flowing freely from brain cell to brain cell. The result is often something called anhedonia, an inability to experience pleasure or joy. Fortunately, there are, to some extent, treatments for this, but it is even more reason to say that if you are capable of feeling joy right now, feel the heck out of it. Half the time, I think that all we can do is just take these vessels that we've been given and use them in all the ways they'll let us. And among the greatest of these has got to be joy. So I guess what I'm suggesting to you this holiday season is to invite yourself into the realm of meta joy. Let yourself be joyful that you can feel joy at all, and confusion, and sure, frustration, and itchiness, and vitality, and all the things. I don't know, there's a whole Rumi poem about that. But mostly joy, meta joy. Let yourself be thrilled that you are here at all, that you live in an interconnected society that meets your needs and that has, for the most part, a large capacity to meet those of others. Let yourself acknowledge and honor the unfathomably unlikely event that you are alive in this exciting, miserable, terrifying, beautiful moment in history with all of these other crazy people. And let yourself feel, because the simple reality of your capacity to experience the feelings of human life is so worthy of your joy. As we worship today, may we give thanks again for our life force, for the fact that we get to experience what it's like to be human in 2021, to be a part of the unfolding of the world. May we find the will to joy in ourselves and also work to spread it, calling on others to return their awareness to the great contingency and the great joy in life. May it be so.
So today we're talking about joy, obviously. And wasn't Music Sunday last Sunday just fabulous? And both the joy that music can bring and getting to hear from so many of our singers and musicians how music brings them joy. And Sarah, I just love how much joy you get from the totally nerdy stuff. All right. So I'm going to start out in a rather unexpected way, but stick with me here. Okay, say you've died, and you find yourself awaiting a final judgment of sorts. But to determine your ultimate fate, you are asked a series of questions, an interview, if you will. This is from an Egyptian myth about the afterlife, by the way, in case you're wondering where on earth I'm going with this, but stick with me. The questions in this interview may surprise you. While there are quite a few of them, they don't actually matter. The questions are really just a smoke screen for the one question pair that the entire interview is actually about. These two questions alone will determine your fate. Want to know what these two questions are? Any guesses? They're about joy. Over the course of your life, did you find joy? And over the course of your life, did you spread joy? So how would you do with these questions? Do you feel like you've found enough joy in your life? Do you think you've done enough to spread joy to those around you? And how often do you go chasing experiences and moments of joy? Now, according to the Egyptian myth, if you answer the two questions about joy adequately, then you're granted entrance into paradise. If not, well, you are henceforth trampled to death by hippopotamus. Not really a fate that I would wish on just about anyone. Now, joy is nice and all, but is it really a matter of life and death? In this story, yes, it is, not just life and death, but thereafter as well. But really, in our lives, we could argue that it is also a matter of life and death. Or at least it's a matter of living or not really living. Because without joy, what kind of a life do we have anyway? Now, before we get too deeply into talking about joy, we need to talk about happiness and the difference between joy and happiness, as well as the connections between the two. Now, in doing my research for this talk, yes, research on joy, doesn't that sound amazing and fun? And doing my research, I found this amazing book that is on a series of talks between the Archbishop Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama, this series of talks that they did on joy. So I'll be quoting from the two of them, and well, because the two of them are both fairly wise in pretty much all matters anyways, and they said some pretty cool things on joy also. So one of the main differences between happiness and joy is that happiness is a more contextual and temporal thing, while joy is deeper and longer lasting. According to the Archbishop Desmond Tutu, joy is much bigger than happiness. While happiness is often seen as being dependent on external circumstances, joy is not. Now, I'm guessing this may make sense for you on some or many levels. We feel happy when something happens, or we feel happy when something doesn't happen, and that happiness is often activated by that particular circumstance. This idea is certainly pervasive in our culture as well. I saw a rather telling example of this in the past week. You know how Amazon will periodically change what their boxes say, what's printed on them? Well, the latest change has the box reading, quote, "Warning, contents may cause happiness." Seriously, warning, contents may cause happiness. I could go on about how wrong this is in so many ways, but I'm guessing you're already with me to that on at least some degree, or at least at this point you'll know what I'm going to say. Now, in the realm of happiness, because let's move on from that Amazon box, please. In the realm of happiness, there's been a ton of research in recent years, and even in not quite so recent years. One of the early landmark studies on happiness was published in 1978, and it found that lottery winners were not significantly happier than folks who've been paralyzed in an accident. It was from this and from other work that the idea of a happiness set point emerged. a kind of personal happiness norm or personal happiness level that we each have that's just a thing for us. And even when facing a new situation, like winning the lottery, the idea that we inevitably return to our own norm for our level of happiness. And more recent research by psychologist Sonia Lyubomirsky suggests that perhaps only 50% of our happiness is determined by immutable factors like our genes or temperament, our set point. The other half is determined by a combination of our circumstances, over which we may in fact have limited control, our attitudes and our actions, over which we have a great deal of control. According to Lyubomirsky, the three factors that seem to have the greatest influence on increasing our happiness are, number one, our ability to reframe our situation more positively. Two, our ability to experience gratitude. And three, our choice to be generous. Our reframing and perspective, gratitude, and generosity. This starts to get to some of the deeper stuff that makes up joy and not just happiness. The Dalai Lama talks about how joy comes from the mind and not just temporal sensory experiences. What he says is, when joy arises at the level of your mind and not just your senses, you can maintain a deep sense of satisfaction for a much longer period of time, even for 24 hours. So, he says, I always say to people, you have to pay more attention to the mental level of joy and happiness. Not just physical pleasure, but satisfaction at the level of mind. This is true joyfulness. When you're joyful and happy at the mental level, physical pain doesn't matter so much. But there is no joy or happiness at the mental level. But if there is no joy or happiness at the mental level, and instead too much worrying, too much fear, then even physical comforts and pleasure will not soothe your mental discomfort. All right, so let's get back to those afterlife questions. And really, we're looking at the first one here. In your life, have you found joy? Now, there are things that contribute to our finding and cultivating joy, and there are things that get in the way of finding and cultivating joy. And it's neurological, too. Now, this research is pretty cool when we can combine scientifically documented neurology with so-called squishy things like happiness and joy. A neuroscientist named Richard Davidson has drawn together the neuroimaging research into a unified theory of the happy brain. I want one of those, a happy brain. I'm guessing we all would like that. But here's what he found. There are 4 independent brain circuits that influence our lasting well-being. 4 independent brain circuits. The first is our ability to maintain positive states. Second, which remember is independent from the first, is our ability to recover from negative states. The third circuit, also independent but essential to the others, our ability to focus and avoid mind wandering. This, of course, was the circuit that so much of meditation exists to develop. Whether it's focusing on one's breath or a mantra or the analytic meditation that the Dalai Lama does each morning, the ability to focus one's attention is fundamental. And the fourth and final independent circuit is our ability to be generous. Now, these are some pretty amazing conclusions, especially the fact that they are all independent of one another and need to be cultivated and exercised separately. The pretty amazing finding is that the ability to be generous not only has its own neurological circuit, but also that it is that fundamental to happiness and joy. And it won't surprise you, though, that the great spiritual leaders agree with this statement, even without the benefit of this recent medical and neurological research. Archbishop Tutu sums it up as, quote, I mean simply to say that ultimately our greatest joy is when we seek to do good for others. Our greatest joy is when we seek to do good for others. Now, there are the things that get in the way of our joy, though, or to use our neuroscience, the ability to recover from negative states. And one way of talking about this might be our stress resilience, which is literally our ability to recover from this negative state. It's our ways of responding to things like fear and anger and other challenges. And then there is sadness, which you might think of as being the opposite of joy, but really, is it the opposite of joy? There's a quote that I love from poet Khalil Gibran. Your joy is your sorrow unmasked. The deeper that sorrow carves into your being, the more joy you can contain. Is not the cup that holds your wine the very cup that was burned in the potter's oven? And is not the lute that soothes your spirit the very wood that was hollowed out with knives? When you're joyous, look deep into your heart, and you shall find it is only that which has given you sorrow that is giving you joy. And when you are sorrowful, look again in your heart, and you shall see that in truth you are weeping for that which has been your delight. Sorrow carves us out. Sorrow deepens us so we can feel ever greater joy. It takes the stresses and the sorrows and the losses to develop our relationships with each other and our relationships with ourselves. As Archbishop Tutu says it well, we don't really get close to others if our relationship is made up of unending hunky-doriness. Isn't it fabulous when a great spiritual leader comes up with a word like that? We don't really get close to others if our relationship is made up of unending hunky-doriness. It is the hard times, he says, the painful times, the sadness and the grief that knit us more closely together. Now, this is no fun to talk about, but I bet if you think back through times of challenge and loss, you'll see it. I've certainly seen groups that are so much tighter and more trusting and really happier together if they've gone through something particularly challenging. And there are benefits to sadness too. New studies conducted by psychology researcher Joseph Forgas shows that mild sadness can actually have a number of benefits that could reflect its value. So this is science saying that sadness is good. In his experiments, people who were in a sad mood had better judgment and better memory. They were more motivated, more sensitive to social norms, and more generous than people who were in the happy control group. People who were in the so-called negative state of sadness were more discerning about their situation, better able to remember details, and more motivated to change their situation. And what is particularly interesting is that brief sadness might generate even more empathy and generosity. I remember when I was going through my particularly challenging divorce, and my best friend pointed out something to me. She said the fact that I was feeling everything so deeply and struggling as much as I was just demonstrated the joy that I was also capable of. That meant something, and that reminder I still remember to this day. So finding joy in your life, cultivating joy in your life. So this is one part of the great judgment of joy questions, but remember the second part too. Have you spread joy? So I ask you, have you done enough to spread joy throughout your life? Now, it doesn't need to be all the time. There isn't a single person who is just a nonstop joy machine. We are people, after all. We are just organic human beings. But have you spread joy? Have you done something today, yesterday, the day before, to bring someone else a little bit of joy? And doesn't it feel great when someone else brings or inspires joy for you? There's research that says that even just walking around with a smile, whether you feel like it or not, walking around with a smile lifts the mood of folks you encounter. And even more, smiling actually raises your own happiness neurochemicals too. So I conducted this experiment myself one time, during my time as a hospital chaplain. Now, I was in a large hospital, and I walked around a lot and passed a lot of people over the course of a day. So I came up with this experiment when I realized that I was walking around with a pretty neutral, straight face the whole time, just a plain neutral face. So for a few days, I tried to walk around with a less neutral face, one that was just slightly turned up into a light smile. Not, a big smile or grinning, that would have looked creepy, come on now. But just a slight smile. And what I was surprised to notice is that the difference was tremendous. Rather than other neutral faces passing me all day, it was smiles passing me. And I don't think that was because I was noticing smiles more than before. It was because folks were unconsciously or consciously reflecting the energy that I was walking around with. Now maybe that's a small thing, but maybe it is spreading joy. So let's take this all even further though. What would it be like to orient and drive your own life every day around seeking joy and around spreading joy? And not just during the holidays when there may be more reminders of joy around you, but all the time. What sorts of things do you already do in your life? And what is your own joy quotient or joy threshold? And then over to the generosity and gratitude. How often do you delve into those parts of yourself? So thinking about this, what kind of changes might make you reorient your days towards joy? Remember, it isn't just about bringing joy to others. It's also about finding and nurturing our own joy. And often we're better at one side of that equation than others. But we need both of them, both sides, finding joy and spreading joy, finding it in your own life, surrounding yourself in your home and your commitments and your time with what brings you joy, and then sharing and spreading joy to those around you. May the light of this holiday season fill you with this joy and spill over into the world around you, bringing joy to all that it touches. May it be so.
As we commit together to make this a loving community, we take time to remember that UUCB needs our gifts and support. We invite you now to make an offering. Each week, half of our offerings are shared with a good neighbor organization who needs our financial support, and we hope you will continue to practice generosity with them during these difficult times. This month, our good neighbor is the Emeryville Citizens Assistance Program. The Emeryville Citizens Assistance Program's mission is to provide food, household furnishings, care, and compassion to those in need in the community of Emeryville and the surrounding Bay Area communities. Offerings of any value are received with gratitude. Details on how to give electronically will appear on your screen as the offertory begins. Thank you. And now, please join with me in dedicating our offering. We dedicate our offering and ourselves to the mission of this congregation, to create loving community, inspire spiritual growth, and encourage lives of integrity, joy, and service.
It has been so good to be together today. And Katya, thank you so much for your music. I don't know if you have noticed this joyful, happy music. There have been multiple people dancing back here to your music during the service. So before we shift to our coffee hour on Zoom, I remind you to check out all of the things happening here in our congregation. You can check them out on our website in the weekly email, the week ahead. And yeah, take a look and join in with some stuff. But before we leave our worship time, there are a few things that I want to raise up. First of all, thank you so much to everyone who participated in our food drive and other activities going on yesterday. We collected over 1,000 pounds of food and raised over $4,000. Thanks especially to our UUCB youth who helped to weigh and load all of the donations. Y'all absolutely rock. And then a couple other announcements regarding our holiday services. We'll be taking a break from Messiah this year and look forward to it coming back next year, good and strong. This year we're keeping things safe and taking a break from it. And our Christmas Eve service will also be online only. But there will be some activities taking place throughout the day on Christmas Eve here in the building. So check out our website and the week ahead for more details about that. And coming up in this coming week will be some Zoom office hours where you can log in, and this is for members and friends and regular attendees. You can log in then and show your COVID vaccination card so we can get you updated in the database and be all ready to go once we get back to our in-person services at some point in time in late January or February, COVID dependent, of course. All right, done with announcements. We need another song about joy, don't we? Yes, let's sing some more about joy. Our closing song, Peace Like a River. The words will be on screen.
Peace
we have ever loved, all that we have ever been, stands with us on the brink of all we aspire to create. A deeper peace, a larger love, a more embracing hope, a greater generosity of spirit, and a deeper joy in this life that we share. And now, from this time of worship, may you go with hope, with connection, with peace, and with joy. And remember, you're never all alone. Blessed be.